All right, Shalom. First and foremost, want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. All right, that's the true name, of the Heavenly Father Yahweh, and the true name of His only begotten Son Yahweh Shai. All right, and Bahashem Rakakwadash is in the name of the Holy Spirit, and want to give double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who rule well and teach well. All right. And I'll entitle this lesson Order Within the Church, Then and Now. All right. Order within the church, then and now. All right. And I'm going to also include a file, a link of some notes that go with this lesson. All right. And Lord willing, it's edifying through the Spirit. Okay. And the inspiration of this lesson was from Acts, the 6th chapter. All right, and we're going to get into the first 4 verses of it, because when you read the chapter, it gives a good a good look into the order of the church. Basically like the structure of the church, the hierarchy, if you will. All right, because when you read the scriptures, all right, when people were hearing the gospel, all right, when they were hearing, Yahweh Shai teach, all right, when they were hearing, the apostles teach, Peter, okay, Paul, Stephen, all right, and Acts 7, it goes into Stephen, preaching, and Dylan. When you read about that, when people come in, they're coming into a existing order. All right, they're coming into an existing structure. It's not a free for all. All right, believers, when you come in, that's why the scriptures tell us that we're newborn babes. All right, you're a newborn babe. All right, and there's an order to it. All right, and like the scriptures say, matter of fact, we'll start off here, because the scriptures talk about, can two walk together unless they be agreed. Okay, so we're going to start off there. This is Amos 3:3. It says, can two walk together except they be agreed? All right, so there's a certain level of agreement and understanding of order when you come into this thing, and that's what makes everything work. All right, you only got one brain. All right, you only got one head. Right, you got 2 ears, 2 eyes, right, arms, legs, but you only got one brain, man. All right, so there's a head. All right, and then there's the parts um that basically are extensions of the head. All right, with really the head being, Yahweh Shah. All right, but a part of the head as well is also, the elders and apostles who, the Lord put the spirit on, to push this word, to preach the word. And if you can't see that, the truth, the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, if you can't see that that's coming, through the elders and apostles, all right, bishops on down, all right, of Great Millstone, if you can't see that, then, you're out of the loop. Okay, there's no other elders going back 40 years, all right, that have been preaching the same thing, the 100% truth, okay, day in and day out. There's no other people on the planet, man. And through the spirit, Yahweh Bashem Yahushua made a very clear distinction. Okay. There's nobody even close. There's nobody pushing the true names. All right. There's nobody pushing the correct understanding, all right, of all the scriptures. Okay, including, controversial, so-called controversial scriptures, like how the Lord deals with grape, you know. There's no other group that's preaching them 100% word. So when you come into this thing, like the scriptures say, um, you're coming, you're building on another man's foundation. All right, and that foundation starts with Yahweh Shai, the doctrine he brought forth. All right. And then, the apostles, the disciples who became apostles. All right. And the disciples they appointed on down. And that whole entity, you know, that whole body that we read about when you read the New Testament, that was reincarnated all the way unto these times today. That's why the scriptures talk about how there's nothing new under the sun. Okay. But Amos 3:3. All right, I'm gonna read it again. I want to get this word agreed. Amos 3:3, it says, can two walk together except they be agreed? All right, and I want to get this word agreed. And the root word of that word is yadai, or yaid, excuse me, yaid. And it says, by implication, to meet at a stated time, all right, to direct, to engage, to agree, to assemble. All right, so this body, all right, this congregation, all right, if you will, all right, it operates based on order and based on understanding and agreement. All right, that's been made in the heavens. All right, and that's what a covenant is. A covenant is basically a contract, an agreement between two parties. All right, so if you claiming to believe in the truth and believes on the names of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, then you're also going to believe on the order in which he set up. All right, now without further ado, just wanted to give an intro. I want to get into Acts 6. Okay, and I'm gonna read the first 4 verses. All right, and again, I'm gonna attach this file in the notes. And ChatGPT generated the file. I gave ChatGPT the precepts, but I told it to quote, to get to list out all the precepts. All right, to list them all out. You know, and you got to maybe I'll do another lesson on that. When using ChatGPT, um, you gotta use ChatGPT as a tool. All right, don't let ChatGPT use you. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding was given unto us. All right, and ChatGPT is low level. It's high level in comparison to things that have been brought out in the past, but it's still not the spirit. It's still not the comforter. Okay, this is Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. It says, and in those days, when the number of disciples was multiplied, there arose murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily administration. And when you get this word, matter of fact, when you get this in the NLT, it says Greek speaking people. All right. It says Greek speaking people against Hebrew speaking people, because that's what Grecians are. Grecians were simply Israelites that were acting like Greeks, speaking Greek, moving like Greeks. All right. But they were still Israelites. Verse 2, it says, then the 12 called the multitude of disciples unto them and said, it is not reason that we should leave the word of the Most High and serve tables. All right, let me read this verse again. It says, then the 12 called the multitude of the disciples unto them. All right, so there we go, right there. Okay, the 12, you have the 12. All right, who are outlined in Matthew 19 and 28. Let me get that real quick. And we'll know the exact order of everything, ultimately in the heavens, when we're beamed up. Everybody's going to figure out who's who, because we don't know who we are, in the reincarnation, for the most part. This is Matthew chapter 19 and verse 27. It says, then answered Peter and said unto him, behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee, and what shall we have therefore? And Yahushua said unto them, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in his throne of glory, ye shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Right. So the 12, okay, that we just read about in Acts 6, they've been promised 12 thrones. All right. It just came out, this is the words of Yahushua. All right. They're going to be sitting on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. All right. And under those 12 thrones, all right, there's going to be a chain of command. All right. All the way down. All right. So let's go back, because the scriptures talk about, every man in his own order. All right. Every man in his own order. Okay. And matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and get that since I quoted it as well. All right, this is what it says, 1 Corinthians 15, and we're gonna get that word order. This is on 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and verse 22. It says, "For as in Adam all die, even so in Hamashiach shall all be made alive, but every man in his own order." All right. And again, man, when the scriptures talk about, the 144,000, the 12,000 from each tribe, all right, it's not just randomness. All right. It's not just, a free for all. Now, Yahweh Shem Shai did create the elect to be sovereign entities. All right. Priest kings. Okay. But even in that, there will always be a chain of command. All right. And that's why when you peep some of these other groups, they're out of order because they're not recognizing Yahweh Shai. All right. And if you're not recognizing and kissing the Son, if you're not recognizing Yahweh Shai, that means you're basically pushing another you're pushing another rulership. Okay. It's really treason, because the scriptures make it very clear throughout the volume of the book, okay, where Yahweh Shai is, and he's numero uno. Okay, he's the head honcho, so to speak. Okay, but this is that word order. Strong's G 5001 tagma, and it says that which has been arranged, a body of soldiers, a corps, band, troop, class. All right, something orderly in arrangement, a series, a succession. All right, so there's this thing is an arrangement. Okay, a harmonious arrangement. What is that? The word the one of the Greek words for world. All right, cosmos, a harmonious arrangement. Okay, and it says a band, and that makes me think about like when you have a band in the world. You got first chair, like if you have a trumpet, for example, you got the trumpets, right? Not only do the trumpets have their own section, okay, within the band, within the orchestra, but there's levels to each placement, to each chair. You got first chair, you got second chair, third chair, all right, so on and so forth, right? Certain, maybe the first chair has a solo, the other one doesn't have a solo, 1, 2, 3, XYZ. You know what I'm saying? There's an order, and within the order, okay, there's, everybody has their own lot. They have their own allotment. Everybody don't get to play the solo. Your solo might be later, man. You might get a solo in another song, man. All right. But this new song that we're singing, all right, which is the gospel being preached, okay, it's being orchestrated by Yahweh Shai through order. Okay. So let's go back. Let me go back. This is back in Acts chapter 6. All right, and read verse 2 again. It says, Then the 12 called the multitude of disciples unto them. And then when you get this word called, let's go ahead and grab that as well. All right, because these words, there's good stuff on these words. You got some good meat on these words. When you get this word called, Strong's G 4341, proskaleo. All right, and you go down to the Strong's definitions, it says to summon. All right, to call towards oneself, to summon. Okay, so the apostles, they summoned the disciples. What does that mean? All right. It says definition, dictionary definition of summon: authoritatively or urgently call on someone to be present. Okay, authoritatively, that's the key word right there. There's authority behind the order that Yahweh Bashim Yahushua set up. It's not just in title, it's not just there's an authority that's set up. Okay. The same way, there's you got the United States government, right? You got the president, you got the Secretary of State, you got the Secretary of Defense. All right, but they're not just titles, there's authority behind these positions, you know. And really the ultimate authority, it goes all the way back up the chain to Yahweh Shai. All right, Yahweh Shai, and then ultimately the Heavenly Father who set up Yahweh Shai. Okay. So let's read this verse again. Acts 6:2, it says, then the 12 called the multitude of disciples unto them, right? They summoned them. All right. And this multitude of disciples, all right, really goes back to, what Yahweh Shai told, or the command that Yahweh Shai gave when you read Luke, the 10th chapter. All right. And I'm going to pull that as well. This is Luke chapter 10 and verse 1 and verse 2. It says, and then these things the Lord appointed, or excuse me, it says, after these things the Lord appointed other 70 also, and sent them two and two before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. All right, so there's a structure. There's a structure that Yahushua set up. He set up the 12. He personally handpicked the 12. All right, but you also had this other, 70, disciples. Okay, and another good example you can kind of mention when going into this is Exodus, the 18th chapter. All right, Exodus, the 18th chapter, man. All right, and I'll read some of that as well. This is Exodus chapter 18. I'm gonna jump down to verse 17. Right, it says Jethro counsels Moses, right, because Moses was the mediator of the old covenant. Moses was the one who received the command from Yahweh Bashim Yahushua upon Mount Sinai. All right. And then he was charged with delivering, said commandments down to the people. All right. But there's a distinction. All right. And that's why when you read that account in Acts 19, all right. Matter of fact, let me see if I can get it real quick. The Lord, the Lord literally set a bound around Mount Sinai that the other people were not to pass, showing you that there's levels. Okay, there's levels. All right, the Lord is layered. Like you got layers to an onion. You know what I'm saying? It's all, all the pieces of the onion are still a part of the onion, but there's levels, there's layers. Okay. Let me see. Yep, this is Exodus chapter 19 and verse 10. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all people upon Mount Sinai, right? Because the Lord came down in a chariot, right? And he lit that thing up, right? When you read this account, so much so to the point where the people were definitely afraid, that they were going to die. All right, but he pulled up in a so-called chariot, man, so-called UFO. All right, and there's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of UFOs, all right, that invade the planet Earth and Babylon the Great very soon. Okay. But this is Exodus chapter 19 and verse 12. It says, and thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, take heed to yourselves that ye go not up into the mount to touch the border of it, Whosoever toucheth the mount shall surely be put to death. All right, and that's order. All right, the whole point of order is, adding, bounds, restrictions. All right. Okay, there are just certain things that are reserved for certain individuals. Okay, and that's a beautiful thing, because when the Lord created you, okay, the Lord created you for a specific purpose. All right, with a specific, capacity. All right. And if you bite off more than you could chew, that could be to your demise, to your destruction. So be grateful for the allotment that you've been given. Psalms 100, enter into his gates with thanksgiving. All right. Or like David said, it's better to be a doorkeeper, man. If you a doorkeeper, be the best door, be the doorkeeper, man. Be the best doorkeeper, man. Because that's still a great honor. All right. And let me keep reading. Or matter of fact, let me go back to Exodus 18. This is Exodus chapter 18. Slovakia, typo. This is Exodus chapter 18, and I'm going to start at verse 17. It says, and Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good, right? Because Moses was basically, he had too much on his plate, right? He's in a leadership position and he had a lot on his plate, all right? And sometimes it's better to distribute, It says, Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. Thou wilt surely wear away both thou and this people that is with thee. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. All right. It says, hearken now unto my voice. I will give thee counsel, and Yahweh Bashem Yahushua shall be with thee. All right. Let me jump down. Matter of fact, I'll keep going. It says, be thou for the people to Godward, that thou mayest bring the causes to God. And thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. All right. So it's showing you, the point behind the structure, the hierarchy. All right. Ultimately, it's to guide, everybody in the right direction. All right. That's the scriptures liken us unto sheep. One of the primary occupations of our forefathers were shepherds. All right. So we're being guided in a particular direction, but it's through the order in which the Most High set up. Okay. But this is Exodus chapter 18 and verse 21. It says, moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear the Most High, men of truth, hating covetousness. All right. And you have to, this is the spirit you got to be in to come into this. All right. It talks about fearing the Most High, right? Men of truth. You got to love the truth. And you got to hate covetousness, because covetousness is a rebellious spirit. Covetousness is opposed to order. All right. And a matter of fact, let's look up the definition of the word covetousness. Covetous. It says having or showing a great desire to possess something belonging to someone else. So that's disorder, right? You want what the next man got, but what the next man got wasn't made for you, wasn't allotted for you. All right. So you got to be mindful of the covetousness of the flesh and of the carnal mind, because that's really where it comes from. Right. But it says, moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear the Most High, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, rulers of tens, right? And there's that hierarchy, that's that structure. Okay, it says, and let them judge the people at all seasons, and it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. All right. And a lot of governments of the earth get their structure, especially Babylon the Great, they get their structure from the scriptures. Like, modern day, you got the local court, right? You got the local, your county, right? You got the state, and then you got federal, all right? And then you got supreme, okay? Same thing or same concept, all right? So let's go back to Acts 6. Let me see. What are the precepts? Got the Exodus 18, Romans 12. All right. Let's go ahead and finish this. This is Acts chapter 6. And I'm going to read verse 2 again. It says, Then the 12 called the multitude of the disciples unto them and said, It is not reason that we should leave the word of the Most High and serve tables, right? Because the 12 were the primary ones, pushing the ministry, all right, pushing the word, but also catching the flack, catching the persecution as well, all right, which is another reason why you shouldn't, you know, always, be trying to take on too much, man. You don't know what comes with it all. You don't know what comes with it. It's better to just be in your position and hold the line, man. All right. It says, verse 3, it says, Wherefore, brethren, look ye out among you 7 men of honest report. And when it says look ye out, it means, matter of fact, let's get this in the NLT. See what that says. This is Acts chapter 6, verse 3. It says, And so, brothers, select 7 men who are well respected and full of the spirit and wisdom. We will give them this responsibility, right? So through the order that the Most High set up, all right, the 12, starting with Yahushua, right? Then the 12, right? They're selecting and they're appointing people responsibilities. They're giving out, authority. Okay, but it goes up the chain. All right, it goes down the chain. Excuse me. All right, let me read that verse again. Acts 6:3. It says, And so, brothers, select 7 men who are well respected and full of the spirit of wisdom. We will give them this responsibility. Then we apostles can spend our time in prayer and teaching the word. All right. So the responsibility that was given to those men who were selected, the 7, was a very important role. All right. It freed up. All right. It freed up the apostles, the 12, to be able to continue to do what Yahushua told them to do, which was preach. All right. And pray. All right. Both of which are of extreme importance through the spirit. Okay. So I'll finish with this. This is Romans chapter 12. This is Romans chapter 12 and 4 and 5. It says, matter of fact, I'll start at verse 3. It says, Because of the privilege and authority Yahweh Shem Yahushai has given me, right? Apostle Paul speaking, right? And a lot of people back then had a problem with that authority that was given to him. Because when you go into Paul's past as Saul, he was actually, a part of the persecution of the church. When you read Acts 6 and Acts 7, all right, the stoning of Stephen. Okay, a lot of people were offended by that and had a problem with the authority that was given to Paul through the Spirit, right? Which, if you had a problem with Paul back then, you had a problem with Yahushua, because Yahushua is the one who appointed Paul. All right, same thing now. If you have a problem with the men, all right, who we believe, the elders and apostles of Great Millstone on down, okay, if you have a problem with their authority through the Spirit, then you have a problem with Yahushua. You have a problem with the Heavenly Father, because it's all connected. You can't separate the two, right? Ephesians 4 and 4. This is a unified thing. One body, one spirit, one baptism. This is a unified thing, man. Right? Romans 12:3, it says, because of the privilege and authority the Most High has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are, right? That's that covetous spirit we talked about. It says, be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith Yahweh Shem Yahushua has given us. All right. Be honest in your evaluation of yourself. That's a part of self-examination. Knowing your role, playing your role, loving your role, man. You know, verse 4, it says, and this is an NLT, by the way, it says, just as our bodies have many parts and each has a special function, so it is with Hamashiach's body. We are many parts of one body and we all belong to each other. All right. And I think that sums up the point of this lesson. All right. The order, okay, the order of the church is what leads to the unification, the unity. All right. And the harmonious arrangement, you know. So I think that's all I had on that. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashem Yahushua Bashem Kakudash, and shalom to the next lesson.